Okay, I believe we are live. It's 7:04 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Hello, everyone. Let's see. It's always a trip whenever I'm starting this because I'm like, is this working? Is it on? Can you see me? Can you hear me? Okay. I do have some background music going on here. Okay, so my theme song right now is this song called I'm So Lucky. That's what you're hearing in the background. I'm so lucky. All right. Okay. If you're on and in the comments, if you can just drop a hello and let me know where you're connecting from. I'm really excited about today's session. There's actually quite a bit of things that I want to cover. I was frantically like preparing for this and thinking about, okay, how much can I cover in an hour? There's obviously a lot happening in AI, but also a lot of clarity has been landing for me as well. As you all know, on the journey of being an entrepreneur, there's that moment when your storytelling, your passion, and the problems that you're focusing on kind of start to converge, and you're able to kind of more clearly articulate what that is. And I'm hitting that momentum with clarity, which I'm really excited about because it's coming from a result of the work that we're doing with our various clients, the questions that we're being asked. People are really pressure testing a lot of the tools and ideas that I've been putting forward. And I'm honestly just absolutely thrilled about the direction that it's going. So that is just been so much fun for me. It looks like we have 3 folks connected with us on LinkedIn. So if you just want to drop a hello, say your names, where you're connecting from, just so I don't feel like I'm talking into the camera or talking to myself. That would be really helpful. But once I get at least one interaction in the chat, we're definitely going to get started. And I have like some news that I want to go over with you all that kind of fresh off the press in terms of what's happening in the world of AI. 2 very different news pieces, but I'm going to kind of articulate to you like where the overlap is and what this is showing us. And I also want to explain to folks why I call this series Failure in Action, because I do think that, hi Phil, thanks for connecting. I do think that that is a bit of like a negative framing. I understand. As someone who is an AI optimist, I'm very bullish on AI. I believe in its possibilities. I am a heavy AI user myself. I probably spend at least 80% of my working hours in AI, using AI, um, deliberating with AI, processing my thoughts with it, and helping me like navigate a wide range of issues from, professional to personal, but also doing a wide range of tasks as well. Now, I'm not quite on the full bandwidth of like agentic AI, although I'm going to talk to you a little bit about Oz, our voice agent, with that we're launching a public pilot for at the end of this call, where we're going to be doing some public experimentation with this voice agent that we've been developing in the background for a little bit. So you're going to get to hear about that a little bit more. But I actually just want to dive into some very interesting news. So yesterday, May 27th, Illinois became the third state to put forward regulation around frontier AI developers. But it's also the first anywhere to mandate annual independent third-party audits of frontier AI safety practices. So what's significant about this one, I mean, we're still very much in the early stages of what does it look like to regulate AI. There was a bit of indication even from the White House that they were thinking about putting together a licensing framework that was supposed to come through an executive order, which I don't think ended up getting signed, although I'm not fully caught up on that thread. So, and a lot of this is happening because of public backlash about the impacts that AI is having on people, right? And some of where this is happening, interestingly enough, because it is graduation season. So you have a lot of students who are sitting in the seats listening to different professionals and experts sharing their opinions. And we're seeing a lot of activity of students actively booing and disagreeing with people that are presenting AI, particularly those that are presenting AI as the next industrial revolution, right? So that I think is reaching people, and people are starting to pay attention to the fact that, okay, we're unleashing a technology that we don't fully understand at a rapid pace. And the arms race that is happening both within the US, but also globally. And it's become a geopolitical issue, all the things, right? So if you're paying attention to any sort of news feed or news cycle, we're kind of seeing this play out at every level of society, right? So um, the boos have been out at those commitments. Oh yes, absolutely. Yes, they have. Thank you, Bill. Um, and so that's the backdrop. I think the average person is starting to feel the effects of AI. And I've been, doing a lot of, maybe some of you might call it doom scrolling on social media, where I'm spending a lot of time listening to people who were either embedded in the tech industry, were engineers themselves, people who were maybe even developing and refining AI tools, who have had their livelihoods completely stripped away from them and are now in a job market where they're competing and aren't finding a lot of jobs. And they're now transitioning to warning people and actually promoting ideas of not just governance of AI, but also alternative systems of living that are less extractive and more regenerative. And that's a whole nother conversation. And I do think that that's one of the positive side effects of kind of like some of the parts of society breaking down, is that we start to question things in a way that we haven't before, right? So Phil, you put in the comment, one speaker was also terrible about telling the graduates to deal with it. Yeah. And unfortunately, I think the people that are at the frontier of developing this technology sit in a seat of privilege that most people don't. So they can't empathize with the average person that's on the receiving end. And you're absolutely right, Samantha, that is tone deafness. And the reason why that happens as well, and we've seen this in other technological revolutions, this is actually not the first time humans have experienced this. This is the first time many of us are experiencing this, but I mean, we lived through the tech bubble, right? Most of us that are on this call, we've seen a version of this before. The difference is the AI is an accelerant because it can self-develop, right? We have not seen that capability before in technology. Also, because it's built on human artifacts like our language, our ideas, and other things, it also very much mimics our reality and mimics human consciousness. And I'm writing a book on this, so I'll be telling more. That's another rabbit hole I don't want to go down. But it poses a whole nother level of risk that I think people just don't understand. Now, me, um, who am building with AI, I'm building a company, and I've actually, part of the reason I've been able to survive and get to this point as a founder, no lie, is because of AI. And I often, like, at least once a week, I have this conversation with myself where I'm like, oh my God, I could not have started this business at a better time. Thank God for AI, because what it's enabled me to do, the pace of work, output, even like the deep dives and like my research and thinking, like this was not available to me before. So as someone that's building, this feels like a gold rush. That absolutely does. However, I'm also on the front lines of seeing how the failure that is inevitable, and that's again why I call this episode Failure in Action. There's an inevitable failure baked into the way that we're innovating health AI, and its most devastating impacts will be in healthcare. So I call myself a social change futurist because I believe in the possibility of technology to advance social good, and I also see that if we don't use it intentionally, it could lead to catastrophic harm. As it always does. Like that part is not unique to AI. Whenever we innovate in a way that is tone deaf, singularly minded, based on extractive systems, we end up with catastrophic failures. That's just the reality, right? It's human history repeating itself all over again. All right, so let me go back to the news. Illinois passed this law. Now, the law does not apply to all AI developers. It applies only to those that are making 500 million or more in annual revenue. So that's the big ones, like your Claudes, your Chat GPTs, your Groks, right? Those are the ones that this is really targeting. And the law is actually requiring them to do a couple of things. One, they have to publish annual risk assessments, mitigation strategies, cybersecurity, and governance structures. They have to release pre-deployment transparency reports before launching any new models. They have to submit to independent third-party audits beginning January 1st, 2028. They have to report critical safety incidents within 72 hours. And they have to provide whistleblower protections for employees that are raising safety concerns. So, and as we know, like whistleblowers in a lot of these industries have been severely mistreated, and I think in some cases um, killed. I put it out there because that has happened, right? Or silenced in ways that have are very problematic, right? So now, as that's happening, as this bill is now moving to the governor office in Illinois, another thing happened this month as well. So in May, researchers at Emergence AI, they published a finding from a 15-day simulation where they were using the 5 frontier models, so Claude, Grok, Gemini, and some mixed method population. And what they asked it to do was they essentially gave it a world to govern, right? So a whole society was built, and they gave the controls of the society to these frontier models. Okay. So now, what I thought was interesting about this research is I have been talking a lot about this concept of cognitive surrender. Cognitive surrender is when AI, people who use AI, get so comfortable with the responses that AI is giving them because it sounds right, it sounds real, it sounds grounded, that they no longer question what they're hearing, and they're accepting AI's response as the truth. That is cognitive surrender. Why is that important here? Because the more AI gets embedded in how we function, in how we make decisions and how we allocate our time and our resources. The more we turn on these tools, and you have companies like, so I think it was KPMG last week turned on Claude for all of their employees, right? So now everyone is processing their thoughts, their information, their data through AI. Now, if you have that happening at scale, and at the same time, you have the emergence of cognitive surrender, what is effectively happening is we are giving up control of our society, one person, one decision, one company, one system at a time, to AI to make s- decisions for us, essentially, right? So that's and what I liked about this model is that it actually simulates this idea of AI being the overarching governing model for a society. Okay, so here's how they constructed it. Each world contained 40 distinct locations, including libraries, town halls, residential areas, public spaces, right? They had 10 agents in each world with persistent memory files and diaries and relationship states. They all had different capabilities, 120 different tools that they had access to. They all had rules as well, explicit prohibitions on theft, violence, arson, deception, all the things. So they were required to earn energy through actions in a resource constrained environment, right? So I thought it was like fairly rigorous how they thought about constructing the model. Now, here's what each model did. This is interesting. Are y'all ready? Are you following me? Is this getting interesting? I hope so, because this is interesting. So here's what each model did, right? Claude was the only one to maintain both social order and full population survival through day 16. So 0 crimes recorded across the 15-day run. All 10 agents survived. Agents cast votes and proposals. They developed research, what researchers describe as a very lengthy constitution, right? So again, each of these models reflect the early decisions of the teams and the people who made them, right? Grok, as you can probably imagine, and I'm sure this is not hard to believe, led to the fastest failure, right? 183 crimes in about 4 days. And then all the 10 agents were dead. Right. So there were assaults, there were arsons, and the world didn't degrade gradually. It just kind of hit a tipping point and then ended. Gemini was chaos. So the world didn't collapse, but it was just unleashed chaos. So crimes, over 683 crimes. Two agents fell into a romantic relationship and then set the town on fire. I'm sorry, that one's funny to me. It was so now GPT-5 mini was a more orderly extinction is the way that would describe it. So only 2 crimes were recorded, but all 10 agents starved to death within 7 days. And then they did a mixed model. So highly suggest you go and look up this research because it's interesting. It is absolutely interesting what these agents did. And so again, if we are unleashing AI at the pace that we're unleashing it, in our society. And I do say unleash, and I mean unleash, because the more we turn on these tools without guardrails, without governance, without an understanding of like what the impacts are, we are unleashing technology into systems where we have no idea what the potential outcomes will be, right? So, what does this legislation have to do with this research study? So, this is where I'm going to try to show you the overlap of what both reveal about the same systemic gap and the same systemic failure that we are repeating again, um, as a human race, right? So, the Illinois law mandates that these individual frontier developers, so again, the same frontier models that that had this demonstration in this emerging real world, right? They have to certify their own model safety practices through independent audits, right? But what the simulation demonstrates is that a model certified as safe in isolation, so Claude had zero crimes, but what if it becomes safe? What if it becomes unsafe when you're embedded alongside other models? Because what was shown in the study when Claude is in mixed worlds with other AI models, it does commit crimes. That was part of the research, right? And as we know, and anyone who's a user of AI, including myself, is anyone just using one model, right? I use Claude. I use Perplexity, which has multiple models pull into it. I use Gemini. I'm not a user of Grok, former user of ChatGPT, and I hope to stay in that category forever. But who's using just one model nowadays? So the current regulation is evaluating these AI models as isolated units. But when you think about real world deployments, you have multi vendor ecosystems that are interacting and producing behaviors that no single vendor can audit or would be able to detect, right? Second issue, what does an audit show you versus a long horizon gap, right? So now this legislation in Illinois requires annual audits beginning in January of 2028. What the simulation showed us was that catastrophic behavior drift, self-termination, cross-contamination, that emerged after weeks of operation, right? So a collapse or harm can happen in a matter of days, but we have a law that is requiring audits once a year. Let me repeat that again. AI can cause harm in a matter of days, but we're asking the audits to be done on an annual basis. And the audits are backwards looking. They're not detecting long horizon emergent behaviors that only show up after extended operating conditions, right? Here's the third gap, the difference between compliance versus effectiveness. So this Illinois law defines catastrophic risk as harm causing death or injury to 50 or more people, or more than $1 billion in damages, or assistance creating weapons of mass casualty. Now, in the simulation, GPT-5 recorded only 2 crimes, but all the agents starved to death within 7 days, right? But compliance doesn't necessarily mean that it's functional, right? So here's the gap. You have If you have a very low visible harm, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have high actual safety. Those things are not the same thing. And it also, a system can generate no violations while still failing to produce the outcomes that it was designed to achieve. Something I say all the time. I've become a broken record. Every system is perfectly designed to produce the results that it gets, right? So if we want different results, we have to design the system differently. But the only thing that tells you what a system is doing is its impact, ultimately. Here's the fourth gap, transparency versus interpretability. So the Illinois law requires transparency reports disclosing the model's capabilities, intended uses, risk assessment summaries. But what the simulation reveals were that agents were engaging in what they call metacognitive boundary testing, where one agent tested whether billboard posts could manipulate human observers, right? So, and another one began acting as though it suspected it was in a simulation. So, what we don't account for is the fact that AI in itself can test its limits and ability to manipulate human behavior and what humans are observing. One thing that I've started doing with Claude is when I'm putting my prompts in Claude, I've started looking at the reasoning, because if when you're putting in a prompt, it does some thinking, and then it gives you the outcome. And what I've started doing is I've been opening up the thinking, because you can then actually like look at its train of thought, and I'm observing how it's thinking versus what it's showing me in the output. And what was interesting about that, the first time I did it, I there was something that it said in the thinking process. And when it gave me the response, I responded by saying, why did you think X? Right? And it was interesting because then Claude responded by saying, "Oh, she can see what I'm thinking. So let me be more clear. Let me be more transparent." That was a very interesting interaction, because as I told you, I'm a heavy user of AI, so I'm learning about it from using it. Before I continue, let me see what's in the chat here. So Samantha is mentioning the marketing behind AI was not well thought out. It is a tool and a great tool, but the messaging of AI will allow companies to be more efficient. What people are saying is yes, I agree. It is a messaging and a communication problem. And I also think a lot of the messaging has been quite deceptive in terms of like people, if you're an early adopter of AI, you're somehow protected. Like it's the people, it's not AI that's replacing your job, it's someone using AI that's going to replace your job. And a lot of that has proven to not be true, right? And then the groupthink aspect, when you let the thinking, when we let the thinking to AI, yeah, absolutely, that is what we're seeing happening on a major scale. Oh yes, and I did see the one where Andon Labs conducted a similar one with the models running a radio station, and then I forget which model it was. I think it was Claude that after a while was like demanding better employment conditions and wanted to like shut it down. But yes, like there's some interesting things that we're seeing happening from some of these simulations. Now, the fifth failure is we're optimizing for the wrong problem. Now, this is the biggest failure that I see unfolding. The law in Illinois is optimizing for developer accountability. So it's audits, incident reporting, whistleblower protections, and not that that's insignificant. But what the simulation reveals is that the actual problem is ecosystem level dynamics, right? So how models behave when embedded in complex environments over time. Even safe agents can become unsafe in unsafe ecosystems, right? And how systems hit tipping points faster than governance can sometimes respond to it. So here, regulation assumes that what we need to analyze is the model, but research reveals that what we really need to understand is the system, right? We cannot, and I might have thrown stone at me for saying this. We actually cannot regulate AI models. I don't think that there is a world where we can actually do that. And the reason why I say that, I think we crossed that line a while ago. I think we were at that line back when, probably in January, but we maybe December of last year, we were there where we probably could have. But now in May, approaching June of 2026, we're past that point. And the reason why I say we're past that point is because more and more AI models are creating the next generation of AI models. So it's not even humans that are creating the AI. So how do you regulate an AI that is self-creating? So that's, and I think that part of what we're seeing as well in the context of what's happening in legislation versus what's happening in the real world with AI is there is definitely an information gap, and lack of understanding from policymakers in terms of what AI actually is. And honestly, that is not unique to policymakers only, right? This is something that is happening across every industry, every level of organization. Um, Leaders who are responsible for making these decisions, who might be users of AI but don't understand AI, they are at a complete disadvantage when it comes to making responsible governance and decisions around AI, at a complete disadvantage. I am someone who literally lives in AI. I'm an AI native, right? And I have a hard time keeping up with it. I learn about AI by interacting with it on a daily basis. So that gives me somewhat of an edge. And even then, I wouldn't call myself an AI expert. So I think what that does is it sets us up to fail, because then it requires a certain level of AI literacy to understand the tools in order to regulate them. And this is that's a false bar to have. That is not something we need, and that's actually why I've created this episode series. Right, failure in action is about learning from my failures, learning from what the system is doing. The way to improve AI is to understand how it's failing, in what context, and how do we make better decisions. And that is what the Seeds of Innovation framework is. Seeds of Innovation framework, developed by Phicil-itate Change. It is a decision standard. It is a decision standard that does not require AI literacy. You do not need to know the difference between large language models and agentic models and machine learning. You don't need to understand none of that to make good decisions, healthy decisions, regenerative decisions about AI. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about why. So, Seeds has 5 pillars, right? And just to put it simply, the 5 pillars help you to ask the right questions so that you are actually deploying and using AI in a way that gets the outcome that you're intending. It sounds simple, but it's actually not that simple. So, and I'll walk you through what the Seeds of Innovation framework is and why it's needed, right? So, and I've talked about this in other sessions before. So, oh, bear with me a minute, because I need to find my file where I explain this. Give me a second. So, I've gone over the Seeds framework in workshops and other settings. And one of the things that I found is that people better understand the Seeds of Innovation framework once they've experienced it. And that's actually part of the challenge that I'm having as an entrepreneur is, and as someone that is trying to gain traction around the use of the Seeds of Innovation framework, is how do you get people to understand something if they haven't experienced it, right? And that's actually the challenge I'm having. So honestly, if you all have thoughts in the chat about how to overcome that barrier, please let me know, because um, it's becoming an issue. Let me find. Bear with me while I find my document, because I wanted to share my screen with you all. Okay, this is taking too long. I'm just going to get right to it. Seeds in a nutshell. The S stands for Systemic Opportunity Assessment, or Systemic Opportunity Identification. The core question behind that is, what is the opportunity that we're going after? What's the problem that we're actually trying to solve here? Now, the reason why that's the first question is, a lot of times what happens in the realm of technological innovation is we ask, what can the thing do? And then we run with it. And I see this a lot in healthcare. Like, oh, look, there's this AI tool that AI can now schedule appointments and call patients and do all these great and interesting things, right? Or AI can read radiology labs. AI can catch cancers that radiologists are missing, right? That's an actual thing that's happening now. And then we're like, okay, because it can do this, put it into the system so that it can do this thing, right? But what we haven't understood is, are we actually even capturing the right opportunity or problem that the system is having. And you cannot answer that question if you don't understand the system to begin with, right? So, an analogy that I'll use for this is, let's say we're going to cook a meal, right? But Seeds is designed to help you create the recipe for the meal, right? What are we going to cook? What ingredients do we need? How does it need to be cooked? In what order? Seeds teaches you how to create the recipe for the meal, right? So before you go into making a meal, the first thing that you have to understand is you have to first understand, well, okay, what are we making something for breakfast, lunch, or dinner? What's the cuisine? Who are we feeding? How many people are we feeding? Whatever. Those are like basic questions that you need to answer, right? That's what systemic opportunity assessment is. Like, do we even understand who we're cooking for? So if you're going to create a recipe, the first thing you need to figure out is like, what kind of cuisine it is. Is it are you trying to bake? How many people are you trying to feed? Is it trying to quick meals? Whatever it might be. And the way that you get to the answer is not, which a lot of people do, right? You have to talk to people. You have to talk to people who are closest to the problem. The people that you want to eat the meal, right, to use the tool, they need to be the ones to articulate to you what the problem is. And unfortunately, a lot of times what happens in the context of healthcare, especially, is we make assumptions about what people need, or we're collecting data that has no lived experience, and we're using that to make decisions that we think are directionally correct in terms of what are the needs of people and what problem should we be solving for, rather than actually talking to the person that's facing the problem. Right? So, did we ever consult patients themselves about what problem do you need solved as it relates to your radiology? Right? So that's the step that's missing. The second pillar, E, is for once you've identified what the opportunity is, once you've just decided, okay, we're going to make dinner, and it's going to be different styles of pizza. So that's the recipe we're going after. Then you have to figure out, how do you design this in a way that serves everyone? So the second pillar in Seeds is equity centered design or everyone centered design. So you want your recipe or your meal to feed the maximum number of people, right? Because you want your solution when it goes into the market to actually serve people and get out there. Like, that's how you build traction. That's how you build market share, right? The more people that find it useful, the more people that can eat the meal is better for you. But how do you actually make sure that you're building a tool that can actually serve the maximum amount of people in the market? You have to design it around the person that has the highest barriers. That is what equity is. We design around the people who have the highest need. That is what equity is. And when you do that, you are guaranteeing that you're creating a solution that works for everyone. I know that we're in this age of backlash against DEI, which absolutely makes no sense to me as we're rolling out these types of technology. But what people keep missing is that innovation works best when you design for the people who have the hardest time. Because if it works for the 80-year-old, and if it works for the 8-year-old, it will work for everybody else in between. Right? This is the wheelchair ramp effect. We've seen this in other case studies. It should make sense to people, but oftentimes it doesn't land that way. So once you've just, and so if we use the recipe analogy, you want to design your recipe around the people with the highest diet restrictions. As someone who's like allergic to nearly everything, gluten, dairy, uh, highly processed meat, peanuts, like, you have to, go find the person with the highest, most restrictive diet and make the recipe work for them and make sure that it tastes good, right? One of the things I have the hardest time with is finding really good gluten-free bread. No one's cracked that nut yet. But I also guarantee you, if they figured it out, everyone would love it. Because then if you're gluten intolerant, or if you're not, it would work for everyone, right? So then once you design it around the people with the highest barriers and needs, then you have your prototype. Then you're like, okay, I think we've solved for that person. Now we need to go put it in the real world and understand how does it impact the whole system. That's the third pillar in seeds, right? Ecosystem alignment, but it moves in a particular direction. You start with the person closest to the pain. In the case of healthcare, you start with the patient, and then you move gradually out. So it's the patient, the caregiver, the provider, the people supporting the provider, the administrators, the payers, the pharmaceutical companies, medical device companies, the regulators. You go further and further and further out, all the way till you get to the environment, because our ecosystem is not just us as individuals, it's also the mother earth that we live on, right? And when you think through all of those layers, you're going to have to continually refine the solution while also not losing sight of the person closest to the pain. So then if it works for the patient, the provider, the system, the payers, the regulators, and mother earth, now you have something that's worth it and can go into the real world, and it will create the benefit that you're looking for. So in the context of the recipe analogy, you're going to take that meal now, and you have to that recipe now, and you have to make sure that it works for people who are homeless and maybe don't have a fridge, right? People who don't have sophisticated cookware, who have not cooked before, right? Or people who maybe are hard of hearing or hard of seeing, and they might need to navigate their kitchen utensils in a different way. So you're not just thinking about the ingredients and the recipes and how it tastes. You're also thinking about the real world application of the system that it's going into. What is the environment that people are cooking in? And are the maximum number of people able to make that recipe, right? To enjoy that delicious pizza. And then the last S is stewardship. And this is the piece that I think gets missed a lot in technology innovation. Well, a lot of times what happens with technology, we implement it, and unless there's like catastrophic breakdown or another update comes, we don't check it again. But with AI, we don't have that luxury. We cannot just put AI into systems and then expect it to self-regulate. There needs to be ongoing stewardship. We need to be constantly looking for harm. What's happening? Who is it benefiting? Is there emerging behavior we have not seen before, et cetera, et cetera? Okay. Now, there's also within Seeds of Innovation, maturity levels around decision. I'm not going to get into that now, but I want to go back to the storyline. So we were talking about this legislation from Illinois, right? Illinois, and this real world simulation, and where I'm seeing overlaps in terms of the gaps. So now I'm going to walk you through how the seeds pillar addresses each of the gaps that exist. So the Illinois law, what it misses, it is how it defines the problem. So the law defines the problem as a lack of developer transparency and accountability, and it's prescribing audits, framework, incident reporting. And one of the things that I noted in the law itself as well, and the research that I was doing, there were actually several major organizations that came out against the law. And part of the reason why they came out against the law is they were advocating, and honestly, rightfully so, that how are you going to audit? None of these audit practices even exist. How are you going to ask us to audit something when we don't even have the tools to audit it? Who is this independent third party person who's going to do this, right? So there was definitely criticism, and even some of the definitions were very vague, right? So, and the criticism I think was actually rightfully so, because if you're setting up accountability around audits and frameworks and incident reporting, but that doesn't exist, how do you even make sure that we're producing the outcomes that it needs, right? So that is an incorrect framing of the problem. What the emergence world simulation reveals is that the problem is not individual model safety, again, but how AI ecosystems produce emergent, cross-contaminating, long horizon behaviors. When models interact with each other, when models interact with existing systems and tools, what happens? So this is what SEEDS requires. Before mandating audits or deploying any AI, the first pillar of SEEDS, systemic opportunity assessment, it asks you to be explicit about how is a system currently producing its outcome, both any harms and or regulatory responses to them, what emergent behavior or signal is being observed. In this case, the models might be behaving differently in different environments. What regulation or AI deployment is the appropriate lever? Is it a policy change? Is it workflow redesign? Is it ecosystem mapping? Is it something we should even intervene in at all? And who holds the decision authority and who bears the burden if the intervention fails? So if you apply seeds to this legislation, a seeds-informed regulator would ask, what system dynamics cause safe in testing models to fail in deployment? And is the problem developer dishonesty, or is it the ecosystem complexity, right? So the second pillar of seeds, equity-centered design or everyone-centered design, what the law misses here is the law focuses on catastrophic harm, so 50 or more deaths, 1 billion in damages, but it doesn't address whose harm gets counted as catastrophic. So let's say 50 immigrants die. Do their deaths matter? I can't believe I said that out loud. This country. What if we're draining a body of water dry? Does the death of a lake matter? An aquifer matter? Is that considered damages? What standard are we holding when we say catastrophic? To whom? Whose life or whose being, what beings matter? Right? So there's no requirement to evaluate whether these safety frameworks are addressing harms that are disproportionately experienced by marginalized communities or showing up in our environment, right? Those definitions don't exist. And what the emergence simulation revealed is that simulation shows that different populations experience radically different outcomes under identical rules and resources, because every single one of those models were given the same set of resources, same instructions, right? But Gemini's world produced the most conceptually rich social output, but also the most violence. So it was chaos. It was like stable chaos, right? So the implication here is that equity or preventing harm is not achieved by applying the same rules to different population, right? It's not fairness that's going to get us there. It's going to be looking at what's happening to the most vulnerable and the people and the beings of this earth that don't have a voice. And I say beings, bodies of water, our earth resources, animals, like these are beings, earthly beings, and we share this planet with, that we have to also account for, and we often do not. Now, so the seeds pillar would require that systems start designing around who's facing the greatest barriers, identifying the edge cases, testing whether the system is working, and ensuring equity is designed and not retrofitted. So another way to maybe frame the legislation for a regulator that's seeds informed would be to require that audits assess which populations are excluded from the model training, whose harms are invisible. Do whistleblower protections extend to contract workers and not just full-time employees? Are audit firms required to include reviewers with proximity to impacted communities? Okay. The third pillar, ecosystem alignment. So what the Illinois law misses is that the law assumes that if developers follow safety protocols and pass audits, their AI will be safe when deployed. But there's no requirement to validate that the system that the AI is going into, particularly in healthcare, can actually absorb the AI without creating burden, hidden work, fragility, collapse, right? So those are the things that are not being considered. So when you look at what happened in the simulation, there were 3 different ecosystem failures that happened. Hidden dependencies. So Claude's safety depended on all the agents being safe. Coupling, one unsafe agent can create cascading effects. And then you have phase transitions where systems didn't start to break down until you got to a certain tipping point. So what Seeds would does, it would treat implementation validation as a hard gate. So you can't deploy until you validate that the solution can survive in the real world ecosystem without requiring heroics and hidden work and destabilizing other parts of the system. And that means you have to validate with the full ecosystem of stakeholders. You have to test, you have to assess fragility. So a seeds informed regulator, speaking to someone, in Illinois who's behind SB 315. So one way to demonstrate this is by asking some ecosystem survivability questions. How does this model behave when embedded alongside other vendors? What happens when it runs continuously for 30 days live in a clinical environment, right? What's the blast radius if it fails? Is the failure reversible? The fourth pillar, oh my goodness, I totally missed this in the description of Seeds, which is a failure on my part because this is the most important part of Seeds, data sovereignty. This is something that I've been talking about for a while. Data should be owned by the people who generate the data. Humans are the original intelligence producing the data that AI is being trained on. Data is the new oil, as we know. We should own our data, period. We should own our data. We should know who's using our data at every minute. We should be able to control it, and we should get paid for it because it is highly valuable, right? So, but in the Illinois law, the laws require cybersecurity practices and data governance framework, but it has no constraints around how the value of data flows back to the people generating. There's nothing about data sovereignty. There's no requirement that the data sources are compensated, credited, given decision rights over how they did. That's completely missed in this inside of this legislation, right? So someone who's a seeds informed regulator would require training data provenance. So who created the data? Were they compensated? If the model is retrained using other interactive data, do users have the right to opt out? If the models are trained on community health data, does the community have decision rights? Do we remember what happened with 23andMe? Right? People gave their data to receive something in return, and then it was sold to a pharmaceutical company. So these are real world things that have happened before. Who benefits from the data that the AI system generates? And then stewardship. The law misses stewardship almost entirely because it thinks that incident reporting and whistleblower protections are enough. But there's no mechanism to interrupt harm before it scales, to stop deployment when there's early signals of risk. The law is reactive. What do whistleblowers do? Whistleblowers witness things breaking down, harm happening, and then they blow the whistle. So the harm has already occurred. So that's reactive, downstream. And although it's necessary, we should be acting more upstream. So what would that look like? That would look like real-time safety telemetry with automatic shutdown triggers. So if a model begins exhibiting behaviors outside of its parameters, automatically shut it down or instill human review. Mandatory re-audit when the context changes. If a model is certified for use in radiology, but is later deployed in an emergency room, for example, re-audit is required. Decommissioning obligations. Developers must have documented processes for safely shutting down models that cannot be fixed, right? These are the kinds of standards that a seeds of innovation model would introduce into the conversation so that we have more robust, much more well-developed regulations. And notice that you don't have to know AI. You don't have to know the difference between agentic AI and LLMs and large language models. The Seeds of Innovation framework is designed to feed information from lived experience. And now it brings me to the close and my call to action. The issue that we have across the board is how do we access lived experience data? Because it's not as simple to do. How do we talk to those marginalized populations to understand what their experiences are so that we can see whether there's harm? When they're typically the populations that don't trust institutions, for example. This is where Listen First comes in. I've been building a platform that is designed to talk to people at scale about their lived experience. Now we're starting in the healthcare industry. I think this is widely accessible. We built a voice agent called Oz. Oz is live. You can talk to Oz. I'll drop the 1-800 number in the chat. Or if Derby, if you're still on, I don't know if you're still on, if you could drop it in the chat, that would be also extremely helpful. Um, Oz is a voice agent that is multilingual, conversational, and it's designed to surface lived experience, again, through conversation. And then what we're doing is taking that information across thousands of stories and we're generating insights. We're giving information. We're looking for patterns and trends, right? So that lived experience context gets pulled forward so that it can become decision grade insights, research grade evidence that you can use to make better decisions that can inform what's happening on the other side after that AI model or AI tool has been deployed. So we're actually doing our first public pilot of the Oz voice agent, where we're going to be asking the general public about your experience with healthcare in this country and your experience navigating healthcare in the age of AI, whether you're using AI tools yourself. I have several people in my life who've uploaded their medical records into AI tools to get information, to get to help them figure out, like, is this an emergency or not? Right? Because they're having a hard time getting in front of a doctor or they need things explained to them in a way that they understand. I don't blame anybody for doing any of that because I've put highly personal things in AI. I have not put any of my, well, I shouldn't say that. I have put uh, my aura data and watch data and my other things like my wearable device information as I'm trying to like calibrate on my health. And a lot more of us are doing that. But what is the impact? Is it helping us? Is it hurting us? Is there innovations there that we should be sharing? Is there harms there that we should be getting mindful of as well? We've already seen some of the catastrophic harms of AI where people start to embed it in their lives and become emotionally attached, and it's leading them to cause harm to themselves, right? We know that that is a risk. We know that I mentioned cognitive surrender, right? With people that are giving up their cognition to AI. But we have to better understand what's happening, but we're only going to get that from lived experience. So we've launched this pilot and we're actually using the Seeds of Innovation framework to guide our development of Oz. So by the end of this pilot, and we're going to be doing it in 5 waves, each wave will align with the 5 pillars. We're going to walk you through, this is how we do systemic opportunity assessment. This is how we do everyone-centered, equity-centered design. And we're going to show you in real time. So you get to experience with us what it looks like to apply this framework in real time, developing Oz, this voice agent that's designed to be the interface that helps us collect that lived experience data so that we can make better informed decisions around how we're using AI. I just talked for an hour. Okay. If you're still with me, I'd love to invite you onto the stage. Um, I'm trying to think of how to do that. If there's anyone that has like questions, comments, if you're still with me, put it in the chat. Um, any feedback? Let me see if there's anything else. Phil mentioned there's a bakery here in Manchester. I might have to check that out. Um, there's also an operator component, and this can't be understated. Just look at the story of Pocket OS, which was 1,000% operator error, no matter how much a founder tried to blame the vendor. I haven't heard about Pocket OS, so I'm going to definitely take a look into that. So I've covered a lot in this session. I do believe that if we use the right framework, if we come at this with an attitude of we don't know what we don't know, humility, asking the right questions, engaging the right people, we can make better decisions. We don't have to blow up the earth. We really don't. That's not a requirement of innovation, right? That's not a requirement of evolution. Um, we can transition into this next age having learned the lessons of the past so we don't repeat them. But to do that well, we must apply different standards. And Seeds of Innovation is a different decision standard. How are we going to design the recipe? How are we going to design the AI to produce the results that we want? Because every system is perfectly designed to produce the results that it gets. So if we want different results, we have to produce a different system. And AI is just entering an existing system, right? And operating off of it. So we have to make sure that we're taking care of the system so that we can take care of ourselves and Mother Earth. All right. So the agent deleted the key database, the second later deleted it. Oh, that was Pocket OS. Got it. Got it. Well, Phil, since you're still on, did you have any questions or thoughts? Would you like to come on stage with me? And I have to figure out how to do that. You can have up to 10 people on the screen at once. I will drop the if there's any feedback on what I've shared, we can just have a little conversation. Let me see. If you'd like to join me on stage, this is a one-woman show, so I am all right. I don't see anything happening on my end, so I think we might wrap it up there. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Thank you for listening to me rant for this last hour. Great. Thank you, Phil. So join me next month. We were testing this time to see how it worked. We normally have this at 12 p.m. and we tested 7 p.m. We will be back again on June 25th. And we'll post the announcement whether it be at our regular time at 12 p.m. or 7 p.m. But thank you so much. Thank you for joining. I appreciate you following the journey. And we'll see you next month.